Putin's election strategy as president. Vladimir Putin's authority is waning since the outbreak of war in Ukraine. Professional media, Sputnik. The next scheduled presidential elections in Russia are set for March 17, 2024, less than a year away. Few people think Vladimir Putin will easily win a sixth term, given the current social and political conditions in the country. Some Russian media reports that Putin's team is working to increase the president's record-breaking 77% of the vote from the 2018 election, as reported by Foreign Affairs. This should be a simple goal to accomplish in theory. The independent Levada Center found that Putin's popularity is at an all-time high, and that most Russians approve of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Kremlin controls the Russian media and can easily silence any critic through arrest or other means. Never again did political parties authorized by the Kremlin to run candidates opposed to Putin receive support from Russian-controlled opposition groups. Given current circumstances, it's highly unlikely they'll put forward a presidential candidate who wins even a small percentage of the vote. They can effectively infiltrate the Kremlin from the outside to boost Putin's vote total. Putin is weaker than most people give him credit for. But in present-day Moscow, optimistic predictions are few and far between. War has thrown Russia into an era of general uncertainty, where no one can feel safe, and where policymakers are unable to formulate even short-term plans. Recently, recordings of a conversation between renowned Russian music producer Joseph Prigozhin and disgraced ex-MP Farid Ahmadov surfaced, revealing their shared anger at Russia's top officials and their conviction that they lack the authority to make even the most basic policy decisions. A number of Russia's highest-ranking officials, including the commander of the National Guard, were said to be conspiring against Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Their comments mirror the internal conversations of Russia's ruling class, which they believe no one is overhearing but which hint at widespread dissatisfaction. Putin's ability to keep control of the country could be greatly hampered if the military situation were to significantly escalate. Moscow has avoided further mobilization so far, but doing so would cause social anxiety with unknown consequences. Putin will have to face increasingly vocal criticism if Russia suffers any further military setbacks. In either case, he may decide to suspend elections, adopt some features of a military dictatorship, and purge elites in an effort to shore up his position. This may inspire Russia's elites to start a revolution. It's possible that Putin's likely landslide victory in the upcoming election has the Kremlin convinced of his inevitable re-election. However, the war has exposed Putin to greater danger than the Russian public realizes. Getting ready for another round of mobilization? It's not hard to imagine a scenario in which Russia's military operations in Ukraine escalate. This spring, Kiev plans to launch a comprehensive counter-offensive aimed at all Russian positions on the battlefield. Ukraine may also decide to begin shelling Russian border areas after conducting sabotage and drone attacks on Russian military facilities. On April 2, an explosion in St. Petersburg claimed the life of one of Russia's most prominent pro-war military bloggers. Moscow may decide to increase its investment in the war in response to each attack so that it doesn't lose any more territory and look bad. In principle, Russia could increase the conflict's intensity without endangering its own people. Assaults on Ukrainian infrastructure could be ramped up by Moscow, and assassinations of Ukrainian officials are not out of the question. If Russia suffers significant losses, however, it may be compelled to do what it did after Ukraine defeated Russian forces in the Kharkiv region: declare a new mobilization and enlist hundreds of thousands of people to fight. Russia appears to be getting ready for just this scenario. Men who are mobilization-ready receive, background check, invitations from recruiting offices in more than 40 regions. Thugs seek to curtail what little liberty exists. More than 300,000 young people fled the country as a result of the last mobilization, which took place in September and October and caused widespread unrest. A similar result could be expected from the subsequent mobilization. By bolstering members of Russia's security forces, this social unrest has the potential to drastically alter the country's internal politics. They have been demanding for a long time that any remaining democratic freedoms in Russia be eliminated by the Kremlin. The Siloviki pushed for the cancellation of regional elections in Russia that were scheduled for the previous year and demanded that the Kremlin declare a state of emergency and shut down the country's borders. Their demands were mostly disregarded. Elections went on as planned, the emergency declaration was only partial, and the borders remained open. However, the Siloviki may gain power if Russia suffers military defeats and subsequent social unrest. If security officials start refusing to carry out Putin's orders, he may find himself with less influence over policymaking. Patriots are becoming increasingly enraged. Russian, angry patriots, a term coined by Kremlin political advisors to describe influential pro-war bloggers who openly criticize and condemn the effectiveness of the Russian military, may also be enraged by the recent military setbacks. Some have even gone so far as to criticize Putin personally, threatening to withhold their vote from him in the 2024 election. At a time when thousands of ordinary Russians are trying to flee the country, they could fill the Russian news space with insults against the military. If things get that bad, the Kremlin may be forced to adopt the policies of a military dictatorship, including increased levels of repression, and the state may become singularly focused on the war, further widening the gap between those who support escalating the conflict and those who do not. Putin's worst nightmare is that the country's elites start to worry about his rule and the country's most powerful people begin pushing political agendas different from his from the outside. If we take Wagner mercenary group leader Yevgeny Prigozhin as an example, he has already distanced himself from Putin by claiming that Putin's officials have made grave errors. Even though the Kremlin can easily silence or eliminate any opposition, Putin's instability could still leave him vulnerable to challenges from within his own regime. Putin's potential successors are listed. As a result, a re-escalation may set in motion competing tendencies. Russian elites may become frightened and turn on each other or even the Kremlin as a result. On the other hand, it may give security forces the upper hand in their efforts to quell public dissent. Putin may lose some of his power regardless of whether there are additional arrests, asset seizures, or purges in Russia. Experts in both the West and Russia have compiled shortlists of potential successors to Vladimir Putin as Russian president. They paid close attention to Putin's public statements, especially those in which he offered either praise or criticism. His recent support for Agriculture Minister Dmitry Patrushev and his criticism of Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manchurev were cited as examples. They also take candidates' demeanor into account. Many Russian experts, for instance, interpret Dmitry Medvedev's fiery rhetoric as evidence that he views himself as Putin's hand-picked successor as president of Russia. Similarly, Secretary of the Security Council Nikolai Patrushev, and father of aforementioned minister Dmitry Patrushev, fits this description.